I'll be discussing our recent study on success in reaching emotion regulation goals during music listening. This study was run from the University of Jyväskylä in Finland with my colleagues Margarita Baltazar and Suvisaara Kallio. Firstly, emotion regulation is a major reason for listening to music, and many studies have shown that participants frequently change their mood in this way. This regulation can serve many different goals, including changing, creating, enhancing, or maintaining affective states. This use of music for regulation is of particular importance for adolescents. It is essential that healthy regulation strategies are developed during this period, as maladaptive regulation can lead to many forms of psychopathology into adulthood. There is a vast body of research on how music is used to regulate affective states. However, no study has investigated if listeners are actually successful in reaching their regulation goals in a real-life setting. So the current study aimed to determine this success in regulation through music listening. We wanted to know, how successful are young people in reaching their affect regulation goals? And also, what are the most significant determinants of affect regulatory success? In particular, we are interested in how successful this regulation is out in the real world. In 2019, 27% of all music listening happened on a smartphone, and this was 44% for the younger age group. As this is such a personal and flexible style of listening, it's important to understand if people are changing their moods in the way they intend. To do this, we used my mobile ESM app, Music. Music uses event-based sampling of music listening experiences, with questions presented at the exact moment of listening, which reduces recall bias. It allows listeners to continue using their regular music player or streaming service, so data are ecologically valid. Music collects data in two main ways. Music experience sampling reports, or ESRs, are presented whenever music is played on the phone. If music is still playing after 5 minutes, a second set of questions is presented. There are also surveys presented within the app, which include basic demographic details, along with standard measures of personality, mental health, and well-being. I'll now show the ESR screens used for this study and explain what they measure. At the moment music starts playing, listeners report the valence and arousal of their current state. They then select a discrete mood state that describes how they feel, with a list of options reduced from 30 to around 10, based on their given valence and arousal levels. Following this, they rate the intensity of their selected mood state. This gives us measures of valence, arousal, and intensity, which we measure again at 5 minutes. Changes in these three variables over this time are how we measure success for each of the regulation goals. As it is only a 5-minute listening period, this can only be considered a short-term success, which may not predict longer-term benefits of listening. Listeners report their music listening context, with screens here for who is listening, where they are, and what they are doing while listening. They also rate the perceived valence and arousal of the music, along with familiarity, enjoyment, and their attention level. The app also collects the song details from the phone, so we can analyze more objective music features to supplement this self-report data. We asked the listeners their main reason for listening from within 8 main reason categories. These categories include listening for their current mood state or for their current activity. Of the primary reasons for listening, 6 were considered emotion regulation goals, which are shown here. The first of these, labelled improve, was the goal to feel better. For this, we define success as an increase in valence while listening and failure as any decrease in valence. Success in the goal to raise or boost energy was measured by any increase in arousal, while for relax or calm down, success was defined as a decrease in arousal. The goal labelled enhance was to feel more of the listener's selected mood state, for example, to feel more happy or more confident. Success was measured as an increase in mood state intensity. The goal diminish was the opposite of this, to feel less of their selected mood state. Finally, maintain was to maintain their given mood state, with success measured as no change in intensity and failure defined as a decrease in intensity. If listeners selected a regulation goal as their primary reason for listening, they were then asked how they use music to reach that goal. For from a list of regulation strategies as shown here on the left. If their primary reason for listening wasn't a regulation goal, the following screen asks, was there also an emotional reason? As shown on the right, options included the original regulation goals along with there was no emotional reason. This was recorded as a secondary regulation goal. We collected data from 293 Finnish participants. The main group of interest consisted of 205 adolescents who were predominantly secondary school students. However, we also collected from a smaller group of adults, and as there were differences, comparisons between the groups were indicated by non-parametric analyses. We collected data from over 2,000 listening experiences, which was around 7 per participant. We'll start by looking at some overall frequencies of regulation goals and success rates. So we can see that adolescents had a regulation goal as their primary reason for listening in around 26% of listening experiences. This was higher than adults, for which it was around 20%. However, adults more frequently had a secondary regulation goal, and this association between age group and goal type was supported by chi-squared testing. Taken together, adolescents used music for regulation purposes in around 70% of all listening episodes, while for adults it was around 79%. Both groups had an overall success rate of around 45% when they had a primary regulation goal. Interestingly, adults had a higher failure rate for these primary goals, but also a higher success rate for secondary regulation goals, with 49% compared to 38% for the younger group. I'll also mention here that overall, valence, arousal, and intensity levels significantly changed from 0, whether there was a primary, secondary, or no regulation goal. This means that these states were changing, but not necessarily in the intended directions. Now we'll look at each of the goals, starting with improve. As you can see, adolescents more frequently reported this as their main reason for listening. Both groups had a positive initial valence, and this was significantly higher for adolescents. Importantly, both groups significantly increased this initial valence and were therefore both successful in using music to feel better. However, looking at the success rates, adults were more frequently successful in achieving this goal. In the third table, we can see the most frequent mood states for which this regulation goal was selected. These states, along with the mean positive initial valence, indicate that to feel better may not have been the regulation goal that listeners selected when in a negative state. We can also see here that adolescents listen to significantly more familiar music when trying to feel better. Next, we have the goal to relax or calm down. While both groups selected this at similar frequencies, a significant decrease in arousal was only observed for the adult group. When looking at the success rates, it becomes apparent that this difference is due to greater success when adults had relax as a secondary reason. Primary failure rates were high for both groups. Around 30% of these cases saw an increase in arousal levels. There are some other interesting findings here. The most frequent mood state for both groups was tired, followed by happy for adolescents. Also, adults selected music which was significantly higher in arousal and was still able to more successfully relax. These findings indicate that relaxing with music may not be as simple as decreasing energy levels. Next, we have the goal to raise or boost energy levels. This was rarely the primary reason for listening for either group, but more frequently a secondary reason for adults. The interesting finding here was that the mean change in arousal was negative for both groups, which, while not significant, was the opposite of raising energy. In accordance with this, all failure rates were higher than their associated success rates. Initial arousal levels were actually higher than those for the relax goal, so it's possible there's some ceiling effect here. Next, we have enhance, or to feel more of a mood state. Neither group significantly increased intensity, and for adolescents there was a non-significant decrease in intensity. While success rates were very low, so too were failure rates, so most of the time intensity levels remained the same. We expect that a ceiling effect was involved here, even more so than for raise, as initial intensity levels were very high. The next goal is diminish, or to feel less of a mood state. Adults were able to successfully decrease their intensity, while adolescents were not. Success rates reveal that the difference was due to far higher success for adults when diminish was a secondary goal, similar to the results for relax. Interestingly, the mean initial valence and arousal were negative for both groups, which was not seen for any other goal. So therefore, it seems that those in a negative initial state tend to select diminish rather than improve. Finally, we have maintaining the selected mood state. No significant change in intensity was observed for either group, which means that mood states were successfully maintained. As such, all success rates are high and failure rates are low. When listening to maintain mood, adolescents had a significantly more positive and more intense initial state and selected more positive and more familiar music. We also looked at how success varied across regulation strategies, activities, and mood states. We found that no regulation strategy was more or less successful than others for either age group. For adolescents, the activity of focused music listening had significantly higher success, while gaming had lower success. There was no difference across activities for adults. For both groups, low valence and low arousal states were the most successfully regulated, with tired, annoyed, and bored the most successful. Finally, we also investigated how success is predicted by both experience and listener variables in a multi-level model. The main outcome was success scores of the 5 regulation goals with continuous success measures. Success was predicted negatively by initial valence, so that those in a negative state had higher success in reaching their goal. It was also negatively predicted by enhance, which, as we saw, had a very low success rate. Success was positively predicted by initial arousal, so those in a higher arousal state were more likely to reach their goal. So we have a few conclusions to draw from this. Firstly, listeners have difficulty in reaching their regulation goals in the short term. This was particularly the case for adolescents, which is in line with predictions. However, it was also the case for arousal-based goals, which was unexpected. There are alternate explanations for these findings, including possible ceiling effects and a definition for relaxation that was too simplistic. Secondly, listeners in negative initial states were more likely to have regulation success. This was seen in the multi-level model and also by the mood states such as tired, annoyed, and bored. Listeners in a negative state seem to select diminish rather than improve, suggesting that they use music to escape a negative state rather than to reach a positive one. Thirdly, it seems like adults are more successful in reaching their regulation goals when it isn't their main reason for listening. Adults more frequently had a secondary goal and more frequently reached it, which can be seen in their significant results for relax and diminish. This suggests that as regulation skills develop, emotions can be changed more passively without being the specific focus of the listening experience. There are certainly some improvements we can make for future studies. Firstly, it would be useful to know if listeners are more successful over a longer time period. We have added a third time point to many of our current studies to see how these 3 states change over 15 or 30 minutes. We've also improved the way in which we measure regulation goals using the interface shown here, which quickly assesses intentions across all 3 effective measures at the start of listening. I will finish by mentioning that all music researchers are welcome to set up their own custom study and collect data with the MuSight app. We currently have around 16 studies running in 7 different languages. If you're interested and would like to create your own study, please see the MuSight website. And that's all for today. Thanks to my co-authors Margarita and Suvi, and to you for your time.